Welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I am Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and today I'm here with a very special guest, Jenny Jackson, the author of Pineapple Street, which we've all been waiting for with such great anticipation. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
We're so excited that you're here. I was saying in the green room, Caroline was originally going to do this interview, and she got sick, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, but sorry, not sorry, because now I get to talk to Jenny, so I'm a bad friend. So before we get started, let me do a tiny commercial for The Blaze. So Jenny, you can hit your snooze button for like 2 minutes. Mighty Blaze was founded in 2020 to put authors online during the pandemic, and we are still here after the pandemic, endemic, next pandemic, whatever, to bring authors to you. We are a team of 35 creative professional volunteers, and we can be found on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. We are ubiquitous. Please check out our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com so you never have literary FOMO ever again. No mo FOMO. Nobody likes that. So if you're new here, welcome. And if you are a repeat Blazer, thank you as always for bringing your light to the blaze like you, Anissa, because there is no party without Anissa Joy. So thank you for being here. And now I'm going to stop talking momentarily after I read Jenny's bio, and then we will be off to the races. So Jenny, are you ready for your official bio?
I'm ready. Make me sound good.
Okay, buckle up. It's you. This is a very easy thing to do. So Jenny Jackson is the vice president and executive editor at Knopf. You all knew this, right? So fascinating. Hi, Mindy. Since joining Vintage in 2002, fresh out of Williams and Columbia Publishing course, Jenny has established herself as a literary hitmaker to the stars with a track record of fostering best-selling authors such as, wait for this list, people, this is only a fraction of her list, Gabrielle Zevin, Emily St. John Mandel, Chris Bojalian. These are all people I love, by the way, as authors and friends. Peter Heller, Jennifer Close, Esmeralda Santiago, Helen Ellis. We interviewed her. She's so funny. And Selma Blair, who I personally love. Hello, Selma. Jenny is also considered extraordinarily adept at helping market and promote her authors, which we love to hear here at The Blaze, obviously. Pineapple Street is Jenny's first novel, and it is getting all the accolades. It's one of the most anticipated books of the year. It's the GMA pick for March. I got this huge email in my inbox from book shopping, like, you have to read this now. Ah! So it is just sweeping everything. And my prediction, which I also made in the green room, is that next week it'll be in the top 3 at the New York Times list. You heard it here from me first. And if so, knock on wood, I get a cut. We can discuss later. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Jenna. That's a really generous introduction, and I'm so happy to be here talking to you about books.
Thank you. Well, it's a factual introduction for sure. So tell us a little bit about Pineapple Street in your own words.
Sure. So Pineapple Street is the story of 3 sisters in one super rich Brooklyn Heights family. We have the oldest sister, Darlie, and Darlie was born to money. And then we have Sasha, who has married into this family. And then we have Georgiana, who is a decade younger than them. And Georgiana is the millennial conscience of the bunch. And over the course of the novel, she does something really bad and decides that the only way to be a good person is to give away the family fortune. And you can imagine what everyone else thinks about that.
Everybody's so happy.
They're so glad. They say, yeah, let's just give it all. No, that's not what happens.
Right. Yeah, sure. We'll give it all away. No problem. We all want to have squeaky clean consciences. Such an interesting peek inside the 1%. Like when I was looking at all of the reviews and looking at the jacket copy before, I had the great pleasure of reading this book. And it is so great, you guys. Like it's a luscious book. But before I did that, I was like, it's like the 1%. Look. Oh yeah, please hold it up for us. Yes, it's beautiful. It's your baby.
It's my baby.
Congratulations. It's so great. But I think it's so fascinating. Like we are all so fascinated with the lifestyles of the rich and famous. And as Americans, we always have been. And also, I just love the fact that, as Chris Bojalian said, like this is the book that Jane Austen would have written if she had lived in Brooklyn Heights. And I was like, that is so astute from our astute friend, of course. So let's talk a tiny bit about that. Do you agree with that? Like, do you agree with that assessment?
Well, it's funny. I do think we have always been culturally obsessed with the super rich. But I think that we're in this really interesting hingy moment where we are obsessed with the super rich and we kind of loathe ourselves for it. I mean, if you look at a lot of the big shows lately, White Lotus or
Yeah.
Succession, or I just watched Glass Onion, or that really dark movie, The Menu, there is this simultaneous like fascination with the super rich and also repulsion with the super rich. I think some of that is because, you know, income inequality has just become so huge that it feels more vulgar than ever. So I wanted to write about it, and you know, to be honest, I enjoyed sort of having my cake and eating it too with this book because I wanted the book to be fun. I set out to write a book to make people laugh. I set out a book to make people feel like they were at parties and they were gossiping and they were flirting and they were having the time of their lives. But it didn't feel like in this day and age I could write a book about, you know, gloriously rich people living their best life ever without any awareness of sort of the cultural landscape. On the other hand, I think like there's no need to be black and white about it. I don't think that I wouldn't be interested in writing a book about terrible people getting what they deserve. To me, that's not an interesting book at all. I would much rather write about people trying to be good and people trying to figure out what goodness means, that asks if it's possible to be a good person who has too big a slice of the pie.
Did you come up with an answer to that? Like, do you think it is possible, or do you think that really super rich people sort of inhabit an echelon that the rest of us like will never have those particular problems?
We will never have those particular problems. And I think that the characters make some really big steps in the right direction over the course of the book. But I don't think that actually these individuals are capable of fixing the problem. I think it's going to take, like, you know, tax reform and governmental change to really change the problem. But I think that these characters start seeing themselves for the first time. And, you know, as sort of like an adventure story goes, like learning to understand who you are is a pretty great adventure.
Mhm. True. And I think, I mean, that would have been a very different book if you were writing about tax reform and governmental change. And
It sounds hot. It does. It does.
that's the sequel. It'll be called Governmental Reform and Tax Change by Jenna
Totally.
Blum.
We'll go from Pineapple Street to Wall Street. That'll be the
No,
next.
that's good. I can tell you are an excellent marketer. No
Thank
surprise
you.
there. Yeah, that was great. So, tell us about the characters in a little bit more depth, because each character is, as you say, grappling with what it means. At first, they're grappling with their own lives, but in the course of grappling with the decisions that they're making about their families and how to spend time with their families, and the sort of the moral questions that are posed by Georgiana, the youngest, her can I give away, like, she has a love affair with a guy who is not right for her, and which also makes the book, as I said, luscious. But that kind of leads her around the world to come back and stare herself in the face about her own money. So can you talk a little bit about what the protagonists are going through, like individually as women, and then also their relationship maybe with money?
Sure. Well, and I'll start with Georgiana because Georgiana is secretly my favorite character. And
Oh,
I
I was gonna
know,
ask that. I knew it. I could tell because she's like, so she must have been so much fun to write. Explain,
yes.
please, why she
I
was.
mean, I don't think most readers will, I don't think she'll be readers' favorite characters, but she's my favorite character. First of all, because she is a delightful brat. And it's so much fun for me to write this absolutely self-centered, unaware, you know, young millennial. And I think one of the magical fun things about writing from close third person is that there is this little gap between how a character understands themselves and how you can let the reader understand them. And with Georgiana, I'm just like having an absolute ball playing in that little area. But before I dork out too much on craft, so Georgiana is the youngest member of the family, and she has grown up really coddled. She went to all the best schools, she had all the best things. She's graduated and she's taken a job working at a not-for-profit. And she thinks this makes her a do-gooder, And at one point, she and her father are looking through a review that he finds in the Times Literary Supplement, and it's a review of two biographies about a saint named Melania the Elder, who had wanted to devote her life to Christ and gave away. She freed all of her slaves. And the father says, "Oh, Georgiana, it reminded me of you because you're such a do-gooder." And like, literally, this is a rich girl who's like partying every night and spending her day like paper pushing, like at her job at a not-profit, not freeing thousands of slaves. And she's like, I guess it does kind of remind me. I guess I am kind of a saint. So she's really in her own world. Georgiana has this older coworker named Brady. And hilariously, I'll just confess, this is like a little bit based on when I was first out of school. I had a job for a year at a not-for-profit, and there was this really handsome older guy. And every time I tried to talk to him, I would just like turn red and say something dumb. And so I modeled the relationship on that. The difference is this guy actually starts to reciprocate Georgiana's feelings, where in my situation, I'm pretty sure he never actually learned my name. So truth and fiction, diverge at this point. But Georgiana falls head over heels for Brady, and she does something really bad. She makes a terrible mistake, and she has to figure out how to be a good person. Then her older sister, Darlie, is, I think, the most overtly likable character. Darlie's a decade older. She's responsible. She's smart. She's ambitious. She went to business school. She is what we call an av geek, which means she's super obsessed with aviation. And she became an aviation investment banker. She fell in love with her husband, Malcolm, because Malcolm is also an av geek and learned to fly his own planes. And I loved writing about them because I loved researching the world of aviation. And also, I think having her have this intellectual passion really brought this character to life. But, she, again, born with a lot of money. She has a trust fund. But when she goes to get married to Malcolm, the trustees demand that she have him sign a prenup. And at this point, they've both just graduated from business school. They're both working in banking. They're making boatloads of money. And it just seems inconceivable to her that she really needs this trust. And also, it seems deeply unromantic to her to kind of plan for her eventual divorce. And so she says, you know what, Malcolm, let's skip it. Let's just get by on our own merits. And I'm going to let the trust fund skip a generation. Our kids can have the money if they need it, but we don't need it. So it's this pretty noble thing. But she stops working when she has children, and then Malcolm gets fired. And suddenly she starts wondering what she has done to herself because she just cut a hole in her own safety net. And then the last character is Sasha, and Sasha is an outsider. Sasha is a New England girl, raised middle class, really, normal upbringing. She's an artist, and she and Cord, the brother of Darlie and Georgiana, met drunk at a bar, like most great marriages, mine and my husband's, and they fall in love, and she doesn't realize he's rich until they're already really serious. And they move into the family limestone on Pineapple Street, the name of the book. And yet she is never fully at home there. And she discovers at one point that his sisters call her the gold digger, and the family doesn't get her, doesn't like her. And it's about her trying really hard to fit in a place where nobody wants her.
It's so smart to have Sasha in there also, because I do think Darlie is super likable, and Georgiana is the one that you love to be like, oh, Georgiana, no, so you have like the one, not the one you love to hate, but the one who you would love to like be like slap out of it,
Yes.
Watch her make all these mistakes. But Sasha is the person who most of us would be, I think, confronted with this sort of monolithically wealthy family. So you marry for love, and then you find out that there's a whole code switching thing that goes on, and you will never know that code. it's like putting a reporter in a book, because then the reporter always gets to ask the questions to inform the reading audience, right? So Sasha gives us sort of an entree into this society.
Exactly. You just absolutely hit on what I was trying to do with Sasha, because I don't think Darlie or Georgiana have any awareness of how deeply weird their life is. And so it's sort of like when you walk into someone's house and you can smell that they've like been baking cookies, but they don't really even notice that their house smells. And Sasha, brings the reader into this house, and Sasha can smell the house and it smells like money, And so she is able to explain a lot of the rites and rituals and their deep strangeness in a way that the other sisters take for granted.
Yeah, it's so funny. And it's like being nose blind, but it's being wealth blind. Like the
Yes.
family can't see it because it's their ecosystem, and it is not Sasha's ecosystem. She's from Rhode Island, and she's not from Newport, Rhode Island either. She's from like Lil Rhodey,
Yes.
So she's one of us. And so we get to take this sort of journey with her. I'm going to ask a side question here. I'm obsessed with the names of these characters. Like Georgiana, I kind of like expect in this sort of crown kind of way, but then you have Darlie, and then you have Cord, and I'm like, how did you come up with the names? And why do all the really wealthy people have all these weird, fucked up names in their families? Like, why? I have a story about this, but I would love your answer.
Yes, seriously. I mean, I actually feel like bizarrely driven by names for characters. I don't understand a character until I have the perfect name for them, and then it all makes sense to me.
Yes.
Yeah, and Cord's real name is Cordington Stockton III. And it is something I've noticed among rich kids, is like a lot of them have last names as first names. Also, a lot of them have 4 names instead of 3 names. It's like the more names you have, the richer you are. But when you have last names as first names, you often end up with, kind of a weird nickname. Darlie actually came to me late. For a long time, she was called Beatrice. But somehow Beatrice was just a little too princessy for somebody who is like as intellectually driven as Darlie. So I wanted her to have like a somewhat androgynous name that probably was a family last name at some point.
That totally makes sense. I love it. And that you're reading about the uber rich when somebody named Sasha is like the low one on the totem.
I know.
Like, okay, if you're the help, then there's this wonderfully mortifying moment that happens to Sasha when she goes to a party that her mother-in-law Tilda. So we have to talk about Tilda.
It's Tilda's housewarming party.
That's right. Okay, so I would love for you to tell us what happens to Sasha at the housewarming party, which is so something that would happen to actually probably any of us.
This is 100% stolen from real life. One of my very best friends had this happen to her at a party with her husband's family on Cape Cod. So Sasha is invited to this housewarming party for her in-laws. She doesn't know what to wear. She asks her husband, and he's totally unhelpful. Like all of us, I'm sure, can relate to that moment when you ask your significant other what to wear, and they're like, "You look great. Wear whatever you want." You're like, "No, I'm helpful." So Sasha decides to play it safe, and she wears a crisp white button down tucked into navy trousers with a pair of small diamond earrings. And at the party, it's all these sort of 70-year-olds, 60-year-olds, friends of her in-laws. And she's trying to mingle, but people keep handing her their dirty glasses and their dirty plates, and she can't figure out why. And at the end of the party, she realizes they thought she was the caterer.
Oh God.
It's so cringe.
It's like it's so mortifying. Like I was like totally, and I would have done the opposite thing. Like I would have been like, okay, I'm going to the housewarming, I'm wearing a ball gown, and then you're the only one there wearing a ball gown.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. I also just enjoyed the chance to kind of acknowledge that awkward thing that happens all the time where, have you ever been shopping in a store and someone thought you worked there and they're like, "Hey, where do you have the size mediums?" And you're like, "Oh, I don't work here." Or like vice versa, you've done it to someone. Like it does just happen all the time. And it's hard to explain why it is so ridiculously awkward when that happens. Like I find it so cringy when that happens. And I think it's just because without really expressing it, we are seeing a hierarchy in some way. We're assuming oh, you're going to be serving me in this situation. Oh, I'm going to, and so it's really this moment, I think, speaks to something that happens to all of us all the time where there's perceived hierarchy. And when we get it wrong, it makes us feel so weird.
Yeah, totally. Like if I have asked somebody to get me something and they're not that person, that is right. But I've also been mistaken for the help. And I worked like so many years as a waitress. And you should always be nice to waitresses, PS, because they can do bad things to your food if you treat them like garbage. But I always felt like I had a superpower because I would be wearing that button-down white shirt and the black pants and have my hair pulled back and whatever. And I'd be thinking, I'm going to take you down in a book if you're mean to me someday.
Totally. I mean, and there's even like little micro like degrees of it. Like, you know how sometimes like the person, brings you to your table and then you ask if you could get like a glass of water and they're like, your server will do that. And you're like, oh my God, I've offended somebody. Like there's a level here I didn't understand,
Right? And I am never the person who can walk into a room and know who everybody is and what they're doing, which in itself is kind of a superpower, I feel like.
I don't have that one.
Like maybe like Ellen Hildebrand could do it, right? Like all of her books are like that. Like she could walk into a room blindfolded and know who everybody is and like what they do for a living and whatever. But like I would never be that person. And so I'm always the person who's just like, oh my God, thank you so much for seating me. And it's just like either the person throwing the party or like, the bus boy or something. So I'll never learn that. I think this book also, like you said before, you wanted to write something funny. And I was looking at my phone a little bit because I was digging through some of my favorite pages. I wanted to give our listeners and viewers an example of like the first time I snort laughed in this book. And then I snort laughed on like every single page. Like it is so funny. So in the beginning, you're welcome. So in the very opening pages, Darlie and Georgiana and their mom Tilda, who we must speak about, are all sitting in this cafe. And there's a guy named Curtis, and he's eavesdropping on them, and they're all looking at like a dating app. And so this is how the conversation goes. Okay, fine. Okay, this guy says, cis male vegan seeks fellow steward of the earth. Never eat anything with a face except the rich. You can't date a vegan. The footwear is ghastly. The mother interrupted. Give me the phone. The Wi-Fi here is terrible. Mom, it's pronounced Wi-Fi. And I was just like, great, I'm just going to sit back and eat popcorn throughout this whole book because it made me laugh so much. Tell me about how do you make people laugh as a writer? Like, do you think it's an intrinsic talent that you just happen to have because you are so adept at capturing ridiculous shit people say in all of its glorious, nuanced incarnation, but also just the observation of like, how people really react placed in these awkward situations, like when somebody hands you a drink and says, "Can you take this for me, Sasha?" Like how do you make that funny?
I think one of the writers I work with is one of my also favorite writers to read, Katherine Heine, and she wrote Single Carefree Mellow and Early Morning Riser. And Katherine has taught me an incredible amount about how you build character-driven humor. And so instead of, just creating a situation that's funny, you also create characters and then you get the reader to know them and understand them. And then you have them say or do the exact thing that they would say or do, or the exact last thing they would say or do. And either way, that is like a key way to make a joke work. So you have to really like get them to know it. And then I find dialogue is so fun to write. And in some ways, like every time I was writing the mother character, Tilda, sometimes I had to like sit on my hands because I was like, I could just have her talk for pages and pages because I think she is so funny. Like everything she says is so absurd. So it was sort of a battle for me, like not to let the dialogue take over the book with her.
I can imagine. Can there please be a Tilda spinoff? Can you describe Tilda for everybody who hasn't had the pleasure of meeting her? First of all, I am terrified of Tilda. Like if I saw her, every time I saw her, I would vomit on her out of fear.
So Tilda is from a family that is maybe like the Cuomo family or the Bush family, sort of, but she would be, like off on the Jeb side or something. So it's this family that's had a lot of, they've had governors, and she has married into a real estate family, but she's had her family appear in Vanity Fair, and she of course doesn't need to work because she has generational wealth, but she likes to work as a party planner, and theme parties are her absolute jam. She lives to throw a party with a vision, with a dress code, with a tablescape, and she also is like really disappointed that Sasha can't seem to do any of those things. And so in one of my favorite scenes, she comes over to Sasha's house for dinner and she just knows the tablescape is going to be lacking. So she brings these like tote bags full of flowers and a vase and even her own food because she knows she's just like not going to be pleased with what is happening.
I love the idea of the tablescape. Like the tyranny of the tablescape was exactly why I think so many readers reading this will empathize with Sasha. Like when you go marry into a family where there's an obligatory tablescape that you know you will never get right. And you may have grown up with like, oh my God, the Heinz bottle sitting on the table while you eat with your family, like watching TV. Like it's just that to me sums up the division in the world so greatly.
Well, I personally feel like I've made great progress because for my whole entire adult life, we were like a paper towel family where, you know, you rip off a paper towel and you just plonk a fork on top of it. And you're like, I set the table. And this year, like, I don't know what got into me, but I was like, oh no, I am going to be a paper napkin person. So I bought like the 1,000-pack of like serviettes. Oh my God, I'm going to grab them.
Hey, nobody else gets to see Jenny's serviette, so you saw it first here.
This is now in the middle of my dining room table. So like, of course not cloth napkins. That's just like a bridge too far. But I'm like, I'm practically Tilda at this point.
And look at that basket. Like Obvi, Tilda would really appreciate that.
A woven basket full of paper napkins. It's fancy around here. I'm just saying.
It is fancy. And she would like pair that with hydrangeas, or actually she would set it nicely off to the side and she would create a tablescape with, I mean, I had to like sort of research what tablescapes were to even talk to you about tablescapes. I was just like, I think I know what they are, but
I sort of think it's becoming a thing. And so, but to research the book, I started following the hashtag tablescapes on Instagram. And I was delighted to see that it was also followed by several Real Housewives. And I'm like, that's even funnier though, that these Real Housewives follow tablescapes because like, obviously they all have like decorators. And I think one even has a butler. So I'm like, why do you even need to follow tablescapes? Like someone else is going to do it for you, but how decadent, you know?
But Jenny, a butler is not going to make your tablescape. I mean, get with the program. The butler's just going to, I don't know, buttle, I guess.
I don't even know what my help does around here. God, I'm so clueless.
Right? Exactly. The butler just, I don't know, opens the door and shines shoes. And so like my tablescape basically is like my laptop, like, you know, the same food I've been eating for the last 4 nights, a lot of hair, you know, whatever. But that's partly what makes this book so fun is that we get to be in this world for a little while where people are like actually like super eccentric and then also just they're just so obsessed with things that are so far from our own remove. It's a little bit like armchair traveling. I'm sorry when Mindy's butler quit yesterday. I'm so sorry about that. That is just that's freaking tragic. Can you tell me, I don't have this actually on my question list, but because I just obviously assumed that you are every character and are super rich and also a guy and also Sasha, but like, what kind of research did you do for the book? And like, what was the factoid that most surprised you? And you were like, oh my God, I have to use this. And then what's one factoid that you couldn't use, that you didn't use?
Well, so in terms of researching, my best research was really just like Brooklyn Heights research because I've lived here for a decade. But the more I wanted to write about the Heights and about, you know, this family is a real estate family. And so I needed to learn a lot more about the buildings in Brooklyn Heights. And one of the things I do know from living here is that for ages, Brooklyn Heights was the base for the Jehovah's Witnesses in New York. And so the Jehovah's owned huge swaths of property in this neighborhood, including like the Watchtower building. They printed their newspaper here, the Bossert Hotel. And then there were all these huge apartment buildings. But interestingly, the Jehovah's eat communally. And so there are apartments that didn't have kitchens in them. One of the reasons that Brooklyn Heights is like a little lackluster on the restaurant scene is because you know, a third of the neighborhood never went out to eat. And so there wasn't the demand. And then maybe a decade ago, the Jehovah's decided to move up to Pauling to get out of the city and move up. So all of a sudden, the real estate market was flooded with these huge apartment buildings with all this like primo real estate. So a lot of the developers came in. That's part of why so many celebrities have moved into the area, because there's just all this like really incredible real estate. But I'm getting to my point. The thing I learned that blew my little mind is that the Jehovah's had made tunnels underground through Brooklyn Heights that connected the different buildings. And so they had to like pour cement into these tunnels, because how crazy would that be if you were Amy Schumer and you're moving into Brooklyn Heights and there's like literally an underground tunnel connecting your building to your neighbors?
So, well, if I were her neighbor, I would dig that, because I'd be like, "Hi, Amy, I'm here for some mac and
Can I borrow a cup of sugar? Amy, hello."
Some like damn packs from you, Amy. Thank you. Probably not. Yeah, that was really fascinating. They were kind of like underground Amish or something. It was really peculiar. And that, honestly, it's like New York is also such a character in this book, and the book made me miss New York so much. Like, I don't know Brooklyn. Well, now I know Brooklyn Heights, like obviously from the bottom up, but I love that. Like, of course, they're all going to live there. It's so great. Tell me like another surprising thing. We haven't talked about this much, but as I said in your intro, like, you're an editor with this incredible, obviously track record, but like love affair with so many great authors. Also like Kevin Kwan, I forgot to mention, is one of your guys, right? So what is it like now to sit on the other side of the table? I mean, not that it's adversarial, there's a round table with editors and authors, but it must be such a through the looking glass kind of feeling of like knowing the industry so well and then coming to the table as an author. Like, what's the thing that surprised you the most?
I mean, I guess one of the things that has been wonderful but not surprising is how incredibly generous my writers have been to me. I felt like it was very important that I include them on sort of, what I was doing. Like, I thought it would just seem so absolutely crazy if, one of my dear friends like Chris Bajalian or Kevin Kwan or Courtney Sullivan just like turned on their computer one day and saw that I'd sold a book. They'd be like, what? And so I mean, that just would feel like so wrong to me. And so after I'd finished the book, but I decided that I wanted to get it published, I talked to all of them and I was like, hey, I wrote a book and I'm going to try and sell it, and let's see what happens. And I know it would have been pretty embarrassing. I think it would have been embarrassing if, my agent had been unable to sell it after I had said to my writer that I was trying to do it. Maybe I should just get over myself. Maybe that's not embarrassing. It happens all the time. Anyway, irrelevant. I was just super touched by how supportive my writers were towards me, because I've learned so much from them. I think that the surprising thing about being on the other side of the table was in revision, because, revision is a huge part of what I do with my writers. I make them add pages, I make them add characters, I make them, reconceive of plot points. And I have this one writer who I love, love, love. And every time he hates revising. He hates it. And every time we revise, I'm like, all right, I need you to add another 20,000 words. And he's like, I'll give you 5. And I'm like, 15. And he's like, 8, final deal. I'm fine. And I always thought it was just because he was like done and on to the next and didn't want to go back in, because it was boring to go back. He wanted to move on to the next thing. But when I was starting to revise and I had to add more material, the book grew by 15,000 words in revisions. I realized that it was something else. It's that it's really hard to get back in to that voice and to the feeling that you had while you were writing. And it took a lot for me to kind of find the rhythm again. And now I have so much sympathy for my writers. When I tell them to go back in and write more, they're not being lazy. They're just not sure that they can find that voice and sandwich it in among like what was already there. And I'm so sympathetic now. And I was a fool.
Maybe every editor should write a book. Also, I have to say, it's really good that your book is so good, because otherwise all your writers would be like, oh my God, poor thing. Like, it's so like,
that's my fear.
As a writer, I wrote a memoir about my dog that came out during the pandemic, and my agent took forever to read it. And I was like, what is going on with you? Because she's usually very assiduous. And she finally, like 6 months after I sent it to her, called me. She was like, I am so sorry. She's French. She's like, I am so sorry. I did not read this for so long, but like, what if it suck? And I have to tell you that your memoir about your beloved dog fucking suck and is boring. She's like, thank God that's not the case. But like
Oh my God, that's amazing.
that's how I
Yes.
might feel if my editor wrote a book and it was just like, once upon a time there was a girl, and I'd be like, oh geez, like don't give up the day job, right? Like now you have 2 day jobs, so like welcome to your new life. Do you feel like a centaur, sort of like an author editor centaur now? Like, do you feel like half and half, or is
That's
it?
amazing. I'm actually uh like puzzlingly good at compartmentalization. I mean, people say that women are not usually that usually it's like a male thing. I am so good at compartmentalization. I literally have two different computers. I have my author computer and I have my editor computer, and I like don't do the other stuff on the other computer. It really just, so I feel less like I don't feel like I feel like I have just cloned myself and I'm two people now.
That's a great trick. I can do the compartmentalizing thing, but there's only one of me, unfortunately. Like that's kind of a bummer, but I'm gonna work on that cloning thing because I think
Yeah.
that's like super helpful. How did your routine change while you were writing? Were you sneakily writing under your desk at Knopf, or were you writing at home before you went to work, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I wrote a lot of it during remote work, which was handy because, automatically I'm saving like an hour and a half a day in commuting. The fact that I never got dressed or put on makeup saved me some time there too. There's very little hair washing. The hygiene was like all time low. And I was so obsessed with the book that I was waking up at 4:30 or 5, just excited to write. And I would write until the kids went off to school, and then I'd go for a run. And while I was running, I would think about plotting and then come back and write some more. And then at 9 o'clock, I'd put away my gold computer and pull out my black computer. And then I would work from 9 to 5. And then at 5 o'clock, the kids would be home. I'd put my kids in the bathtub. I would pour a giant glass of wine, grab that gold laptop, and I would just sit on the closed toilet lid and write while they were in the bath. And they'd be like, Mom, my fingers are wrinkly. And I'd be like, that means it's working. And they'd be like, Mom, I'm cold. And I'd be like, you're fine. So I just wrote like on either end of the day as a sandwich.
So amazing. Is the gold laptop actually, does it have like gold glitter on it?
It is like just, no, it's just a shiny rose gold Mac.
Okay, got it. Okay, I'm picturing like this glitter. And I'm
The
like,
golden computer.
golden, I'm like, maybe that's the problem when I'm blocked. I need a golden computer with glitter or like rose gold neck. Meanwhile, Mark in the producer's chair is like, stop talking about glitter, Jenna. Like, don't get sidetracked. Okay, I'm back. That is an amazing story. What did you start with? Like, what was the genesis for the book? And then when did you know you were in love with it?
It started with Sasha. So one of my very dear friends who lives here in Brooklyn Heights is married to a guy who grew up in Brooklyn Heights, and they have a little toddler. And during the pandemic, his parents absconded for the country, and they said, hey guys, like nobody's living in our brownstone. Do you want it? My friend's like, did somebody just offer me a New York apartment? Yes. So they moved in, but his parents had never actually moved any stuff out. So she would call and just tell me these crazy stories and be like, oh my God, all of his sisters like spelling bee awards are still in like our room. And then her baby found a baggie that had all of her sister-in-law's baby teeth in it and ate the baby teeth. And I was like, that's just going to go in a book. And so I did. So I stole her story. I asked her permission. And that's where the story started, was Sasha moving into her in-laws' Brooklyn Heights brownstone.
Which is so amazing. And I love they call it the limestone and not the brownstone because it's made of limestone. They're like, should we have dinner at the limestone? And I'm like, love it. You get the yacht, like they're so great.
Totally. My dad was talking to me the other day and he's like, so is that a thing in Brooklyn? Like people are like, oh, in the limestone. And I'm like, no, it's just my weird characters. There are limestone buildings, but nobody's like the limestone. Like they're just being weird.
Yeah, they are. And I love that it also at the same time is very grand, the limestone that they live in on Pineapple Street. But it also is like Sasha says when she's having like a temperamental moment, she's like, it's like gray gardens full of weird moldy baskets and old toothbrushes. And that's true too. And I feel like there's sort of like with the people I dated who were like incredibly came from like generational wealth families, it was like that. Nothing ever got thrown out. Like nothing ever got thrown out. So that's
Yes. I've
yeah.
always found that fascinating because I always sort of thought, if I ever got like crazy rich, I would buy an amazing car. I would have the best clothes ever and I would never fly commercial again. But instead, like if you know any of these like hardcore super rich wasps, they drive like a Volvo from 1994 and they only fly like Coach and they have moth-bitten sweaters. And that is, I mean, it's how the rich stay rich. They don't spend their money. They just leave it all in the account, continuing to multiply and multiply and multiply. But that is not my vision. If I suddenly, inherited a bundle, I would never ever fly commercial again.
Yeah, well, you might have they all have private jets also is the thing that we skipped over. But like you, like me, Jenny, are a good bourgeois. Like I also would probably not be using the same toothbrush from like 1972 if I were like super, super wealthy.
No.
Right. Tell me a little bit about the marketing aspect of not just of Pineapple Street, but I'm interested in like you're known as an avid marketer for your writers and since Blaze is obviously interested in promoting writers and putting them front and center, and this is a cause so near and dear to my heart, like, what do you think that you do that is extraordinary for your writers? And then what do you think is like the most challenging part of the process for you so far as an author?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I think that the very first thing that an editor does when they acquire a book goes on to multiply, multiply, multiply. And that is you write a description of it. And that description, honestly, is usually the note that I write to my boss about why I should acquire a book. Because then down the road, after we buy it, we go on to write our like title information sheet that then goes on to be shared with our sales reps. We write a launch presentation for our sales reps. We write audio presentations. We write jacket copy. There's, so many pieces of writing that go into this, but very often the first time you read a book and you talk about it, that is when you have the purest, absolute, most sparkling, incisive view of what that project is. And so I like to BCC myself when I write my boss on that and I save that email. And then, of course, I hone it, I improve it, whatever. But I really think it's remarkable if you pick a title, any title, and then go through and read the review coverage of it, and then go and read that jacket copy. You will see time and time again that even the best reviewers, without meaning to, mimic the jacket copy. The way that the editor has framed the read goes on to tell the story of what that book is to readers forever and ever and ever. And on some books that are tricky to talk about, like, I published Emily St. John Mandel's most recent 2 books, and Sea of Tranquility is a really hard book to talk about. And I worked like a crazy person to crack that nut. And I think that all the reviews then went on to frame it the exact same way. So anyway, look at me taking credit for other people's like work success. But I will say, in a way, that is like the biggest marketing piece of all, is to make sure that whoever talks about your book the first time gets it right, because that's just going to follow the book forever.
and no pressure though, I'm sure.
No pressure, no pressure.
That, I mean, I do think that's true. If I have to blurb a book, like I sit and think about it for a little bit, and I won't write a blurb unless it's actually right and describes the book. And those moments of lucidity where you're like, oh, this is why people should read this book, feels really good. I imagine it's something the same for acquisitions, and
Yes.
then hopefully it's helpful. But I really love that. We have audience questions. I could ask like so many writer geek questions and editor geek questions, but let's go to Ron Block, who we all love. Hi, Jenny. Hi, Uncle Ron. I know how hard I'd love to know how hard it was to keep the GMA pick a secret, but it's a great question.
Oh my gosh, it was really hard not to scream it from the rooftops. And then, of course, we get the finished books in that have the seal on it. And so I was like hiding them under my desk in my cabinet, like terrified. And then I saw somebody pointed me to some blog that had a spoiler that, they had figured it out. And I was like, oh my God, what do we do? The secret's out. And my publisher was like, GMA is not going to take away the book club pick just because a blogger guessed it. Like, chill out. But I was so nervous that I was going to mess it up.
Oh God, that's so amazing. Did you go on the show yet?
So I've done a pre-recorded. So on Tuesday, they showed a pre-recorded thing of me saying, "Good morning, America," blah, blah, blah. And then Saturday, I'm going to be live in the studio. I've never been on live television before. I've tried on approximately 85 different outfits, but I have one now. So I'm ready to roll. Also, classic me, like, let's worry about what you're going to wear and not think about what you're going to say. So
I
that's
mean, legitimately, my first question is, what are you going to wear? And I'm like, yeah, you are on live TV right now. You are on TV right now. So this is a great rehearsal for you. But
That's
yeah,
right. It's live. Okay, I forgot to be nervous. Crap.
Right. Oh, now you're really nervous. But yeah, that was my first question. Isn't like what to say because you get to talk about your own book and the just compressing it into that few minutes. But like, I hope you have something that looks like a big pineapple.
Well, for Halloween, my dear mom, who was so excited about the book, dressed up like a pineapple, and it is this like foam yellow like dress kind of with a hat that like, it's like a chef's talk but with green stalks. And my mom has been threatening to wear it like to the book party, to all my events, and I don't know, she really might. We'll see. I'm not going to borrow it for GMA though.
I hope she does because it will be like such great. Like a pineapple showed up. We have one of our Blazers, Julie Gerstenblatt, has a book coming out next week that's called Daughters of Nantucket, and she's been doing amazing book talks with like all of her outfits. She's like, this one is called the "Oh Captain, My Captain," and this one is called the Nantucket Basket, and like so she does the dress like a cover thing, which I think is hilarious. And
I'm gonna go follow her.
Oh, it's very funny. Like she comes out with new ones like every day. She's like, I'm going to test this on like Rhode Island TV, and if it doesn't work, it's going to be called the retired costume. But your book cover is beautiful. Can you hold up your book cover again for us?
Absolutely. So, Viking hit it out of the park on their first try. It was unbelievable.
I love this. You could wear like a beautiful teal whatever, and then you would look just like your cover with a little gold. We can ask Julie how she would dress you. Okay, so Mindy wants to know, how did you come up with the title Pineapple Street? So different from many of the books I have seen recently, which is true. I know the answer, but you tell.
Well, it's so funny. So I was living on Pineapple Street in Brooklyn Heights. I was living at 35 Pineapple Street, and yet the whole time I was writing it, I didn't know that that was the book's title, which is hilarious to me. And so on it, like the characters were always living on Pineapple Street and the book was always based there. And yet I don't know it. I know some people can write with a title in mind, but for me, it was like the title was the absolute last thing. And then I was sitting there and I was like about to send it to my agent for the first time. And I was just like, oh, obviously Pineapple Street. It was there the whole time.
I love that. Yeah. What else are you going to call it? Like the very, very wealthy people of Pineapple Street, I guess. So that's too long for like a tag, right? No, I love it. I love books that have place names. Like to me, that speaks to the integrity of the story in some way. It's a little bit like the story is so good that we don't need to come up with a zhuzhy title. It's just like, this is where the action is happening.
And it's funny. I like by accident had done a little market research because when, living on Pineapple Street, whenever someone would be like, oh yeah, come on over. Where do you live? Oh, on Pineapple Street. They would involuntarily go, oh. And so I'm like, oh, people just like that phrase. And so I had accidentally done like years of market research to be like, that is a good phrase.
Yeah, we like it a lot. Yes. And now I'm sure like your whole life is about like marketing pineapples and people sending you pineapples and you're like, enough with the pineapple. You have to write like a totally different antidotal book next time.
I know. Thank goodness I like pineapples.
I know. Here's a question from our audience. As a career editor, what is the one thing you never really understood about the writer life until you experienced it yourself?
What's so funny is when people would ask me long ago, like, why did you decide to be an editor instead of a writer? I would say, well, it's because I'm so social, and I think a writer like spends all their time by themselves. And as an editor, I love that I am like working with people all day. And that was my understanding of it. That wasn't right. I actually think that I have found being a writer to be quite social. No, there are certain hours of the day where I'm not talking to anybody, but so much of like my material, so many ideas, so many of like the dialogue comes from talking to other people. And so I feel like being in the world and in the mix is a huge part of the writer's life. So I think I got that wrong.
That's really interesting. Like demented and sad, but social. It's like a little Breakfast Club line for you. But I think that's true. When I was like a baby writer, when I graduated from college, I applied for a job at every major publishing house, including I had decided I wanted to work at Random House for no reason. But that was
Yeah.
it. I want to work at Random House. And I remember sitting in the office and having my interviewer say, "Why do you want to work here?" And I was like, "Because I want to be a writer." And to me, that seems so self-explanatory. And I did not get that job.
Yeah, they, for whatever reason, it's been like, yeah, against the rules to admit that for so long. I think we need to update our rules.
I think so too, because I'm a writer and I have never been so happy in my life as in a way during the pandemic, because I work with people from the Blaze every day and it's an incredibly social thing. So I'm so glad that there is this symbiosis, and I'm glad that you crossed over to our side of the round table to bring us Pineapple Street. It's such an enjoyable read, you guys. Like, again, you heard it here first. I think top 3 next week on the list. We'll see, but I think it's going to be such a happy book on the beaches and in all the vacation chairs this summer. And Jenny, do you have one more thing that you want to say to your brand new, like, greatly adoring readership?
Oh, I just want to say how totally honored I am to be at this round table. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh my God, we offer you the pineapple of hospitality at this table. Over here. We're really happy to have you here. So again, you guys, if you wouldn't mind holding up your book a third and final time, the book is Pineapple Street. Mark has put other links in the chat. You can buy several copies of it, as you should, to read for yourself and give to everybody who wants an incredibly luscious, incredibly entertaining, funny, astute, poignant read. So Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today, and Godspeed.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.